Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this brief but hopefully very powerful session on the need to integrate mental health and psychosocial support more systematically in international peace-building efforts. My name is Paul Bekkers. I have the honor to be the Special Envoy for MHPSS on behalf of the Netherlands government. And actually I hope that after this session you will all be Special Envoys for this important topic. Why? Well, maybe we should listen to Minister Sigrid Kaag.
The theme of this conference, Harnessing Potential, is very relevant. Indeed, in these extraordinary COVID times, we need to harness potential. Not only the potential of all of you, listening and participating today, from many sides of the world and fields of experience, but also, and especially, the potential of the communities we work with. And in doing so, we need to acknowledge the paramount significance of mental and psychosocial well-being for a person's capacity to act and to cope, to connect and to look forward in harmony with loved ones and their wider community. This is even more crucial for people and communities seeking ways to overcome grief or deal peacefully with perceived or real causes of resentment, but certainly trauma. In a recent briefing to the UN Security Council on the impact of COVID-19 on peace and security, Under-Secretaries General Di Carlo, Lacroix and Lowcock stressed that COVID-19 poses a grave threat to the UN's conflict prevention and peacekeeping efforts. And indeed, the current crisis highlights more than ever the fundamental need to harness existing potential by acknowledging the soul. This is why the Kingdom of the Netherlands is an advocate of 1. The systematic application of a psychological lens to conflict analysis. 2. Structural integration of mental health and psychosocial support, or MHPSS, in all our efforts aimed at improving access to justice. 3. Prevention of conflict and the fostering of reconciliation. 4. Building and sustaining peace. Not only is MHPSS crucial at an individual level, it's also essential and effective at community level. MHPSS helps to strengthen and rebuild social cohesion and trust. It helps counter the disintegration of the social fabric of society. This is why it's especially important in settings where there is a real risk of destabilization or a resurgence of conflict. In his 2020 report on building and sustaining peace, the UN Secretary General has undertaken a further integration of MHPSS in peace building, a crucial endeavor. Because MHPSS is not an additional burden, neither an afterthought, but a powerful tool, as it helps people to maintain or regain their resilience and perspectives. It gives them strength in rebuilding their society. It also helps to rebuild trust between people and helps them address grievances, much needed in reconciliation and mediation efforts. It also works towards fostering community social cohesion, enabling, for example, the acceptance of former child soldiers by their community, and the list goes on. Ensuring that MHPSS is included in all conflict prevention and peace-building efforts is not only urgently needed, it's also possible in close partnership with people who've lived this experience, with grassroots organizations and civil society. On the occasion of the 2020 UN Peacebuilding Architecture Review, the Kingdom of the Netherlands has undertaken to advocate that the UN and its member states structurally and explicitly anchor MHPSS in all their peace-building programming, that we make use of the existing rich body of knowledge, expertise and tools on MHPSS in humanitarian settings, and that we rely on the considerable experience on MHPSS within our efforts to achieve transitional justice. Let's make sure that the potential of MHPSS is recognized by partners involved, particularly at the interface of our humanitarian, developmental, and peace and security efforts. In the coming 30 minutes, we'll share a number of findings with you and call on you for your indispensable insights and suggestions. But obviously, we also seek your cooperation in harnessing the potential by acknowledging the soul. Mind the mind now to build our shared future.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Thank you for your words and thank you for your leadership. And with me here in the studio is a friend and a colleague, Mariette Schuurman. I'm very happy that we are here face to face because we see each other regularly, but usually by Zoom or MS Teams, so it's good to see each other face to face, 1.5 meters distance though. Mariette Schuurman is a director of Stability and Humanitarian Aid Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And she's also a member of the advisory group of the UN Peacebuilding Fund. And Mariette, would you be so kind and explain to us about the Netherlands initiative on the Peacebuilding Architecture Review?
Yeah, thank you, Paul, and thank you for your kind words. And indeed, well, the Minister Kaag said it all, and I think it's also only justified to say that really the personal engagement of Minister Kaag, that we really managed to get mental health and psychosocial support on the global map. That started last year in Amsterdam with the Mind to Mind Now conference to get a global recognition of the importance of mental health and psychosocial support in humanitarian and emergency responses. And then we decided to take it one step further and to also make sure that we get that global recognition of mental health and psychosocial support in building peace, in peace-building efforts. And we decided to take the Peacebuilding Architecture Review as the anchor point to get that global recognition, building on the experience that all of you have and have had for years, if not decades, on working on mental health, psychosocial support in crisis response, but also in reconciliation and peace building. And to get that recognition up and that experience and that expertise to a global level in order to make sure that mental health, psychosocial support is not an afterthought, as the Minister said, but a strategic tool. So we, basically what we did, we had 2 rounds of consultations. The first with interdisciplinary task force, a group of experts from both peace building and mental health communities, in order to come up with recommendations, what needs to be done in order to set that norm specifically to get mental health and psychosocial support as a critical part and a core strategic tool for peace building efforts. And the second round of consultations was with UN member states. And we included, obviously, conflict-affected states, and there was a big recognition that mental health and psychosocial support is critical for reconciliation and for recovering better together, as we say these days. So that resulted, as the Minister said, in the Secretary General's report on building and sustaining peace, acknowledging the importance of integrating mental health and psychosocial support in all our peace-building efforts. And we work actively now with the UN system, not only as a norm-setting institution, but also, very practical terms in what we can do through the tools that the UN has to make sure that in our peace-building efforts, that norm is now translated into practical actions and guidance on how to do this properly. So that's indeed Mind to Mind Now, acknowledge the soul is no longer an afterthought, but a part of our considerations, of our analysis, but also in our goal setting when it comes to increasing the effectiveness of our peace-building efforts.
And you may want to introduce.
And indeed, thank you for that. That was my role. I mentioned already the task force, the interdisciplinary task force on mental health, psychosocial support in peace building. And we're a privilege to have Professor Brendan Hamber as a member of that task force to present to us the recommendations of the task force on mental health, psychosocial support in peace building. Professor Hamber, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. As we've just heard, under the UN Peacebuilding Architecture Review, the Netherlands undertook an initiative to enhance the integration of mental health and psychosocial support into peace building. The task force of experts was formed, and as you heard, I was part of that task force, and we advised the Netherlands on recommendations for the UN Peacebuilding Architecture. And it was my pleasure to serve on the task force, and today I just wanted to briefly outline some of the recommendations to you. Before doing that, however, I wanted to provide some context to mental health and psychosocial support in peace building. And specifically, what we know is that violent and political armed conflict results in the loss of life, but also in physical and psychological injury. However, armed conflict also destroys communities, political infrastructure, and it undermines individuals' sense of belonging, it dismantles public institutions, it alters norms and values. To quote Bracken and Petty, modern warfare is concerned not only to destroy a life, but also ways of life. Any situation of armed conflict, even as it is with the current pandemic that we're experiencing, is also intensified by social problems, which are often linked to and created by war, such as poverty, unemployment, environmental degradation, corruption, gender violence, and many more. These unaddressed social issues fuel resentment, creating conflict, institutional distrust, political instability, leading to ongoing cycles of violence. A medicalized or very narrow healthcare approach will not really capture these wider social impacts. To quote the task force recommendations in the Netherlands paper, it is therefore important that we work at the individual level, restoring relationships at family, communal, and society level, and helping individuals address these wider social issues. MHPSS interventions are key here, and MHPSS is defined by the Interagency Standing Committee in Emergency Settings as a composite term used to describe any type of local or outside support that aims to protect or promote psychosocial well-being and to prevent and treat a mental health condition. MHPS interventions are important not only from an individual mental health perspective, but also such interventions directly impact on the effectiveness and sustainability of peace building, as well as long-term violence prevention. We are lucky enough in that a robust set of policy guidelines, tools, training manuals, and networks exist for MHPSS, but most of these are in emergency settings, and most of these are also steered by civil society. As was mentioned, the importance of MHPSS has been recognized by the UN Secretary General in the 2020 report on building and sustaining peace. But as we outlined as a task force, there are challenges to this integration. The current work of MHPSS is not yet structurally and implicitly considered as part of the broader peace building and conflict prevention efforts. The contribution of MHPSS practice to sustaining peace is insufficiently understood, and very often MHPSS is narrowly equated with specialized medical services or expert trauma counseling. So to address these issues, the Netherlands, with the support of the task force, has primarily made 4 recommendations. And I'll try and summarize these. The first, we need to actively promote the increase of knowledge on MHPSS and peacebuilding nexus. And we recommended the creation of a digital global resource hub on MHPSS and peacebuilding in close cooperation with various agencies across the UN. Secondly, increasing awareness within the UN system is important. Particularly for a whole of system approach. For example, integrating MHPSS into training curricula of peace building, conflict prevention, peacekeepers, and so on. And also a basic training for psychosocial skills for UN staff in conflict affected areas. This can contribute significantly to reducing stigma, equipping personnel, but also addressing the broader acceptance of MHPSS within the peace building architecture. Thirdly, we need to integrate MHPSS into UN peacebuilding policies, frameworks, and programs. To do this, various steps will be necessary, and I don't have time to outline them all, but these would include a Special Secretary General's report, thematic reviews, aimed all at a specific policy guidance on how to integrate at country level MHPSS into peacebuilding. Fourth and finally, we feel it's really important to build partnerships, create opportunities, and incentivize collaboration with peace-building practitioners and civil society. As we mentioned, this has important skills that exist already within civil society. For example, providing modest funding for projects and pilots that integrate MHS in peace-building, and enhancing skills in a range of different ways and incentivizing partnerships. So, to conclude, MHPSS approach begins with the acknowledgement that all crises, whether conflict or health-related, are deeply contextual. Dealing with such crises requires interventions that recognize the inevitable link between the psychological and social well-being. This requires a full spectrum of interventions at family and community level, as well as basic social services, and it may also entail engaging at the political level. This, we all know, is not an easy task in conflict societies. That said, but to this end, psychosocial approaches are of course not a magic bullet. One size will not fit all. Context of course matters, but the approach equally offers unique opportunities for sustaining peace. So we all look forward to its further integration into the peace building agenda. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Hamber, and thank you, Mariette. I think this gives us great insight into the work that's being done at the UN, where the Peacebuilding Architecture Review is more or less used as a vehicle to systematically create attention for MHPSS. And on this architecture, I'm very happy to say that we have a representative of a part of the architecture. That's Mr. Samuel Risks, who's the head of the Conflict Prevention and Peacebuilding Unit of UNDP. Welcome to you, sir. And if I may ask, how does UNDP so far integrate MHPSS into its work? Where do you see the opportunities and also challenges when integrating MHPSS into peace-building efforts? The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rickers, Ms. Sherman. It's good to see you again, and a general appreciation for Netherlands' support for peace building and prevention, a strong champion, and I'll mention a couple of those, obviously. I think the recognition and the criticality of MHPSS in conflict and post-conflict settings is absolutely clear. I think was mentioned, obviously, by the speakers, certainly. I'm glad to speak after Brandon because I think he mentioned several of those. So the criticality of the problem is clear, and among what we know now already, and to quote from the recent Secretary General's report on peace building and sustaining peace, being able to integrate this as an innovative way of working on development and peace, cross-pillar approach, peacekeeping, everything else, seeing this as a way to increase the resilience and agency of people and communities. This is not only an individual problem, this is a societal problem. The well-being of the individual is integrally linked to the well-being of society as well. Particularly difficult, but particularly important in conflict and post-conflict settings. And I say in conflict settings because now we're seeing protracted conflicts that last 2, 3, 5, 10 years. So working on mental health and psychosocial support becomes really quite imperative. Also, in these protracted settings, you have a mix of humanitarian development and peace building work that is happening at the same time. How MHPSS fits into that, I think, is becoming quite critical and quite important as well. Needless to say, with COVID, everything is multiplied, everything is worse, everything is more difficult, along with the many challenges that have come with COVID, not necessarily in violent conflict crises, but everything else that relate to shrinking civil space, damage to human rights, rise in closed political systems, etc. All of that, I think, has an impact, and there are new spaces, I think, to watch rather than only the conflict and post-conflict spaces. What are we doing and how is this done practically speaking? I share Ms. Sherman's perspective that the time has come to turn this from norm to action and to make sure that this is done at a policy and a program level as well. So we're working with a lot of partners on the ground in many of our country offices to figure out how to actually do this. And we try to grab and elevate some of these ideas from our country offices, and we have several of those. But first, I must share that based on the work last year and this year, as part of the Peacebuilding Architecture Review, we've been actively contributing, obviously, to some of the development of the key recommendations that were mentioned earlier by the task force. And we look forward later on in October to holding this global discussion with the Netherlands and to engage our staff and partners on MHPSS and peace building. So that the planning for that is underway. Some of our country offices are actually doing the following as well. In Pakistan, UNDP is building strategic partnerships with universities on MHPSS in relation to the prevention of violent extremism. That is a particular area of interest, etc. And then in other countries, the Philippines, Tanzania, and Kazakhstan, UNDP is partnering with civil society organizations and experts on providing MHPSS support, and we've trained professionals to be able to provide mentorship, counseling to youth considered at risk of radicalization. Another program that the Netherlands supports, and a lot of people find it dear to their hearts, the joint program for supporting national capacities for building prevention, peace and development advisors. We have nearly 80 countries being served by this program, and peace and development advisors are intricately using this lens as part of their work, using conflict sensitivity and engaging with national communities to try to do more on MHPSS and analyze some of the psychosocial impacts in conflict and post-conflict settings. Our mapping that is currently ongoing for at least 34 country offices working on prevention of violent extremism will also unearth a lot of this. And then lastly, for us, October is an important month for staff awareness on mental health and psychosocial support. So some of this will come up. I think what comes next is absolutely quite clear. Certainly the norm to action, policy to program. And then I think one critical area is to look at the tools that actually exist. I think as far as we're concerned, more needs to be done on tools and guidance and how-to approaches, and I think that's definitely the next step. We look forward to a lot of partners, certainly the Netherlands, but a lot of people on the call, to also support this effort through people effort, human resource capacities, financial resources, to be able to develop guidance on how to do this practically as well, particularly for communities in conflict, particularly for communities as they recover from conflict. I think there is no way of saying this any more critically and saying that the health of an individual coming in or in conflict and coming out of conflict becomes the health of the community and becomes the health of an entire nation in a conflict and post-conflict setting. And we just have to be aware that a lot of this is deep-seated. Mental health and psychosocial issues become a problem in an instance and take years to fix. And I think this is a long-term protracted effort that I think a lot of people need to be involved in. So on our part, thanks again for the invitation, and I look forward to hearing more from the colleagues as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Risk. And clearly, from your introduction, we can see already a lot of work is done on MHPSS in peace building, which is also very much the case in civil society organizations, grassroots organizations. And I'm happy we can now hear some practical experience. We can hear about the impact of an integrated approach in conflict-affected countries. And I'm very happy for that to introduce Mr. Patrick Onyengo Mangan. Until recently, he was the CEO of TPO Uganda and now of REPSI, the Regional Psychosocial Support Initiative. Mr. Onyengo Mangan, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm pleased to be making my presentation today, basically sharing some of the experiences that we have encountered in this sector of work. I build my discussion around the notion that peace building begins in the mind. When communities emerge out of conflict, the effects on their mental well-being, the effects on the traditional community support systems are quite far-reaching. And like someone mentioned, it takes time to recover and heal. What psychosocial support has done from the communities we have worked in is we have seen psychosocial support complete the connection between the individual, what they are thinking, and the ability to relate and build back effectively the systems that they were relying on for their resilience, for their coping, and for their support in general. We have seen psychosocial support being able to support families and households to deal with daily stresses, mothers worrying about where their children are going to be the whole day, young men sitting and not being able to do anything, and therefore getting exposed to multiple vulnerabilities as well. Unattended to traumas tend to emerge mostly in the post-conflict phase. Once communities go back and families go back to their normal setting, they begin to experience difficulties. They cannot relate better. They struggle to coexist. And this is even more pronounced when you find that sometimes the perpetrators of these acts live within the same communities. And so integrating psychosocial support within peace building is something we should be focusing on. We have seen the benefits of doing so, rebuilding kinship relations and supporting communities regain their livelihoods. Conflict setting, you have community structures, and some of these community structures most times tend to have the will to engage. And engaging with local policymakers, engaging with sub-county institutional actors is extremely important to ensure that you're integrating psychosocial support within the broader spectrum of actors who are usually within these settings of post-conflict rehabilitation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, rich contributions, big challenges, but huge opportunities. What we're trying to do, we try to bring about certain changes to enable you to do your work even better, to continue doing it, and to scale up and multiply best practices, and to truly bridge the divide between communities, professional communities on MHPSS and peace building. And for that, a lot of expertise is available, a lot of information is available in the field, with the UN, on the humanitarian side, or with UNDP, and that's good. And while we have this discussion, there's actually a parallel discussion, a chat session, and that clearly indicates that we need to talk more. We need to discuss this issue more elaborately. We want to learn from you, and we actually want all of you to become special envoys for this important topic, this common aim. And for that, I would like to invite you for a follow-up meeting, which is organized a month from now by mhpss.net. And with that, I would like to conclude. And I want to say thank you very much for the participants, for all of you listening and taking part. And I wish you a very good, excellent day ahead. Thank you.